Excellent. Thank you. So, and then we put them on YouTube, for which they will get probably 0 views. I would be shocked if they got any views, but you never know. So that's our CMAP policy, which is why I had to switch to Zoom from Teams at the last minute. So, let me go back to participants. We have a couple of new folks here that I'd like to introduce themselves. So let's start with IDOT. Jason Lang, would you like to introduce yourself to the interagency consultation meeting group? You
Sorry, all these things are different, trying to find where the mute.
It's all good.
I'm Jason Lang. I'm sustainability specialist at IDOT. I've been IDOT about 6 months now. I came from actually East West Gateway Council of Governments. I worked in the TIP, air quality conformity. I know the fun and joys of interagency consultation. I've been through many of the meetings in St. Louis, so it's not foreign to me, but it'd be interesting to learn. And working with Chris Schmidt on air quality. So that's my 2 cents. But thank you all for having me.
All right. Let me see. Is your counterpart on here? I don't see him. John, I don't see your Tracy. No, Taylor. Taylor. I don't see Taylor on here. Okay, so FHWA does have a new person who has taken over the position that used to be vacant for a long time. That was Mark Fuller. So Taylor, what was his last name? Peters, who's supposed to be joining us. I don't see him on the call at the moment. So hopefully he will join in at some point. There's nobody waiting, is there? No. Okay. We also have a counterpart, NERPC. Grace Benninger is new at NERPC doing this role. So Grace, maybe I invited her just so she could see how we go about our business. So Grace, if you want to introduce yourself to the group, and then we'll get moving on the agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Grace Benninger. As Russell stated, I am the spatial analyst here at NERPC, and I have taken over some of the responsibilities for our modeling, both for our travel demand model as well as our emissions modeling. So excited to be here. So thanks for having me.
Okay. As I mentioned, if you weren't already on here, we're going to move some stuff around on the agenda. We'll go, if we have time later on, we'll go back to intros if we need to. Most of the people on the call know each other already. In the room, just in case you can't tell, we have Mitch, we have Sarah, we have Jose and myself from CMAP, and then we have John Paul from FHWA. So that's who's in the room. Everybody else you should be able to see as a participant on the screen. So if you have any questions about who's on the call, 22 is a lot for an interagency consultation meeting. We normally used to have, when we met in person and on the phone, maybe 6 or 8. So perhaps there's some interest in some of these topics. So quickly, because we know that some folks have to leave, we're going to go to item number 5, which is the transportation conformity SIP. And I'm going to start with Illinois EPA. If you guys want to give us an update on where you're at, Rory.
Not a lot of updates on that, although we are moving ahead with it. I've reassigned it to Cal Soderega here at the agency to kind of button up, I hope, to where we've gone through about 3 rulemaking, or we've got 3 rulemakings going on right now, and 2 of them were his. So we're kind of finishing those up, and he's jumping back into that actually today, and yesterday he has started on that. So not a big update, but we do hope to get that finished up, and I would guess off to public notice fairly soon.
And there is out for public notice right now is a ozone attainment demonstration.
Yeah, the attainment demonstrations for both of our non-attainment areas, Chicago and St. Louis, are out for public comment, and they are going to that public comment period ends on December 6th, so Friday. after that. I'm not aware of any comments that have come in. A lot of times they come in at the last minute, but I don't know I can't remember if we've had much comment in the past. So after that, I think we would just need to put together a responsiveness summary for the public comment period. And like I said, we haven't seen any comments come in yet, so that might be really quick. Or I hope we could get it done within the week and get that shipped off as a SIP submittal, hopefully next week or the one following.
Michael, would you like to provide us any updates on anything related to 2015 ozone? I believe we have a bump up that'll be coming at some point.
Yeah, so the bump up notice is in our sign off process. We hope to have it signed in the near future to sort of line up with the other areas. We're on the hook to do this by February 3rd. So hopefully we can line these up in the near term and have that effective sometime early in January. And we expect SIPs early 2026.
When you say it has to be done by February, or it has
Yeah,
to go out?
Has to be done by February. Has to be
Oh,
effective.
so that means it has to go out in January then. Okay.
Yep.
All right. We've been bumped up before. This will be to serious, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
It really doesn't have any impact at all on what we do here at CMAP, if I'm not mistaken. It's more on what Illinois EPA would need to do.
There'll be a new motor vehicle emission budget associated with the rate of progress and the new attainment demo though. So
Okay, so there is a new.
that's something to think about in the next 6 months or so.
And by a new budget, it'll have to probably show further reductions. So the budget that we currently have, which is this kind of hybrid budget for years before 2035 and years after 2035, is that going to go away and we'll just have one budget?
Well, it's going to be there'll be a new budget slotted in between those years. So the moderate budget's probably going to just go away via time, and there'll be a budget for serious, which the years escaping me. Rory can help me with that. What year that's going to be?
I believe that's going to be a 2026. Is that what we're talking about?
I think so. Yeah.
So you're saying we have to have a 2026 budget?
Yep.
Or it would be for 2030?
It'll be setting up a 2026. Depends how you do your bin and the analysis, but there's going to be a 2026
I
budget.
think you went on mute, Mike.
Am I on mute?
Oh, you're back.
Okay. Bad headset. Yeah, it'll be a 2026 budget, Russell.
So right now we model 2025 and we model 2030. Would we need to have 2026 as a model year to replace 2025, which will be going away in the next year?
You can interpolate.
Right. So for this attainment demonstration for moderate, we had a base year of 2017 to 2023. And so we kind of backed into 2023 from the 2025s.
But if we no longer model 2025, which after this year we wouldn't need to because we'll be in 2025. So by the end of like this time next year, we wouldn't need to model 2025. 2030 would be our first model year. Would we?
Yeah. So you're not, I mean, the SIP won't be due until we'll have the effective bump up. So your new modeling would be a 2026 year.
Okay. Is there, in terms of ozone, I think that might be it. There's no discussions that I have heard of about changing the standards. There's no, I think they're not even revisiting ozone, are they?
Not in the
that
near
I've heard.
term. Yeah.
Okay. So in 2008 never did get revoked, did it? It's still there. even though we're in
Yep.
attainment. So, all right. So that's it for ozone. Let's move on to
Well,
PM.
one more
I'm sorry. go
one more
ahead.
thing
Sorry.
I could throw out there for ozone is we've held our second hearing for our NOx raft, which is a requirement for moderate. And so we have reduced some NOx emission rates in those rules. We're not exactly sure when that will be adopted. We're in post-hearing comments on our second rule. And I should note that we did reduce the applicability threshold to 50 tons per year for a stationary source so that we won't have to revisit NOx rules in, to meet the requirements of Sirius. So we just went early on that, and we do expect significant reductions from it. It'll got to wait and see in which years we expect those to come, but
All right. Yeah, I think moderate is 100 tons and then serious is 50 tons. So you're already a
right.
step ahead there.
So we just went to 50 in this rulemaking.
Excellent. All right. PM 2.5.
So right now,
where are we at on that?
PM 2.5, the recommendations are due 1 year after the setting of the standard. And so that is with me. My people have put together a recommendation. The recommendation is going to be that we keep the same size or same boundaries as all of the other PM SIPs we've had in Chicago and St. Louis. But in Chicago, it'll be the same counties, same boundaries as previous PM non-attainment areas or proposed non-attainment areas. So there was some, the 2023 data is all, obviously not great from with the wildfires. However, it was found that even if we had excluded a bunch of dates with wildfire, it still wasn't going to be enough to meet 9 micrograms per cubic meter. And so we are going to be recommending Chicago for non-attainment. Like I said, I think those are due in February. That's all put together. It's with me. I've got to do the review. It's 80 or 90 pages. So we'll be looking at that, and then 1 year after that, US EPA will be doing designations. I couldn't say for sure, but I would expect that US EPA will probably take our recommendation and leave the boundaries where they are. So yeah, we did have a number of possible PM 2.5 non-attainment areas that all were resolved when we had our there was a bias, a monitoring bias issue, and so there's a lot more areas at stake, but we're down to just Chicago and St. Louis, and we think it's going to be, I think it's the same as the ozone non-attainment area.
Yeah, that's what I was really going to ask is, I mean, we didn't have really a previous non-attainment area for PM. We
Right,
had
right.
Unclassifiable issue.
Right. We did a recommendation and then ended up non-classifiable. So our previous recommendation and the unclassifiable area that was, I guess, classified as unclassifiable, that will be the boundaries.
Yes.
And that should be going to public notice soon.
All right. So that actually, from a modeling standpoint, is good news because then we don't have to model different geographies and create separate inputs and all that kind of stuff. So keeping it the same as the ozone non-attainment area from the CMAP perspective is very desirable. So we would be supportive of that. Ben, you have a question?
Yeah, I just want to read back what I heard from Rory is that the IEPA's proposal is going to be that the same exact boundaries for the ozone non-attainment will be or is recommended for the boundaries for the PM 2.5.
Yes, and Russell's support of keeping the modeling and all that.
Well, I'm not going to go against Russell. We'll put it that way, but just wanted to make sure I heard correctly.
Well, I was just going to say that was the idea, is to.
We're going to put in one little extra township just outside of the CMAP area as well.
And
just
that's
just
the
for
that
Russell.
way.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
And Ben, just so you know, that's also the same approach for East St. Louis. While that's not germane to our call for your stuff, it might be something to note.
Absolutely, thank you.
And Michael, I'm assuming, you know, when Illinois EPA gets their stuff submitted to you, you do the review. But based on what you're hearing today, I would think that you would also be supportive of maintaining the same geography.
Yeah, I would expect that.
Okay. So for those who are new to this, that wasn't necessarily the case when we went to the 2015 ozone non-attainment area. They had two counties, I think. McHenry was excluded and maybe just McHenry. And so then we had two geographies, one for the 2008 standard, one for the 2015 standard. That eventually got addressed and the standard and the two non-attainment areas became the same geography. That was good, but I can tell you just from the brief time that they weren't, that is somewhat problematic on the modeling and the data side of things. So there is a lot of value from my perspective at CMAP in keeping these things the same. Ben, you got another question?
I just wanted to clarify with Rory, as I know he has to leave as well. You had mentioned that there's 12 months here and 12 months there. So what is the current anticipated date for which this situation will take effect?
Looks like prior to February 2026.
Yep.
So the feds will issue some notice or something before that time stating that we now have to do all these different things for PM 2.5.
Yeah, we'll do a designation notice, essentially listing all the counties and saying which ones are attainment and which ones are non-attainment.
So what they'll
Got
do, Ben, is that when they'll just say what the non-attainment area is. They're not, the requirements for when you're in a non-attainment area already exist. So now they'll just be applicable to that area, whereas they're currently not
Absolutely.
applicable. So they won't issue and say what you have to do now that you're not attainment. They'll just say now you have to follow the PM 2.5 rules, I guess. Is that fair to say, Michael?
Yep.
And IDOT obviously has some procedures that we will have to reinstate as well. So thank you all very much.
Hotspot analysis will be the number one thing that we'll have to reinstate. So, okay. Any other comments or questions on how PM 2.5 related to that item? So if there are none, we're gonna move back up to the
Russell,
top.
another satisfied customer.
There you go. It's all about you, Ben.
Thank you, boss.
So have we had anybody else join the, let me see. So Taylor's still. Okay. All right. We're gonna go to we're gonna go back to item number 2, back to the base at the top of the agenda. The onto 2050 conformity amendment. Let me see. How do I stop sharing screen? And I'm going to, if I can, bring up the amendment, which I thought I had on my screen. I don't know why it didn't show. Yeah. Consultation. The 3 consultation agendas. I don't know why it's not showing up. Let me just see if I go to PDF. Yes. So let me click on. I need to get the thing out of the way. All right. Out for public comment now, and I believe it closes next week. I can't even remember when it closes now. Having come back from Thanksgiving, I've lost the track of things. We have 15 projects on the current conformity amendment that has gone out for public comment. Later in the agenda, I'm going to go over a bunch of the details and how we did conformity different than we've done in the past. The list of projects, as far as I know, we've not received any public comments either, and we typically do not, so that's okay with me. The last two times we got a public comment that were not related to the conformity amendment at all. They're about a sidewalk project in Chicago, I think, or south suburbs, and something about a metro train on the UP North line. Neither one were related to anything on the conformity amendment. This was our first conformity in which we used Moose 4. So again, a little bit later in the agenda, I'll go over some of the details on how that affected how we did conformity, because it did have a big impact on how we went about our modeling aspect. The main thing here is, other than the 15 projects that are going through conformity, really there's only one new one that is of note, which is the road expansion project on I-80. So they're adding, I don't know, I would call it a lane and a half. It's really mainly I-80 in Indiana is the main part of this project, in which they got a big grant to put in what they call DSL lanes, which are dynamic lanes. So if you've gone by O'Hare and you see there's the one lane on the inside shoulder that has the red X or the green X, that's basically what we're talking about. But they're going to do it for a long stretch that goes from basically Torrance in Illinois all the way to I-65 in Indiana. It's a couple $100 million project on the Indiana side. On the portion that's in Illinois, which is really small relative to the scale of the project, it's only about $35 million. It's not a huge thing, and they're only putting in the dynamic lane on the inside shoulder that is going eastbound. So there's no additions to traffic coming from Indiana, only going from Illinois to Indiana. It's a little bit of a unique situation in that the lane itself is only 10 foot wide, which is a typical interstate lane is 12 foot. It's going to be restricted to cars only, no trucks. And it's going to have a posted speed of 45 miles an hour. How they enforce that is anybody's guess, but you know, we model what the project is. And so the lane next to it is being reduced from 12 feet to 11 feet to help accommodate this lane, which is really this shoulder. And that's also going to think that that one's not, we didn't restrict that one to trucks, although it's unlikely that trucks would be using that. There are some issues about whether or not there's legal protections in there that make it illegal for trucks to be in that lane or not on the Indiana side. So I don't think that that's a truck restricted lane. So that's the big project that's on here that's unique and new and had no impact whatsoever on air quality on the Illinois side, but it did, it is something that will be going through conformity on both our side, which is the CMAP side, which it's doing right now. And then it'll also be conformed for the Indiana portion by NERC. And so we needed to do some coordination, make sure we're being consistent in how we approach the modeling for this particular project. It's unique in that we don't really have a lot of projects that cross state lines, nor at this scale. So that made it unique. It allowed us to work with our counterparts at both Indiana DOT and at NERC on some of the modeling challenges to represent the project in both our tip and in our model as accurately as we can. So that was kind of unique, this conformity. The main thing is our budgets. As you can see, and I'll zoom in a little bit so we can see the ozone budget is our main issue that that's what we're required to show. So we're getting a little closer. Emissions have gone up just a little bit on VOCs and NOx in the near term, but they are dropping off a cliff as we get further out. So we're going to go over just exactly what we're seeing. Some of this is attributed to some changes that we've made at CMAP. Some of it's attributed to using a new model. But in the near term, emissions have gone up a little bit, but in the out years, they are gone way down. So we're, as you can see, we're not even at half of our NOx budget in after 2035 and beyond. Even 2030, we're not even at half. Now we do have a higher budget for 2030, but that's, you know, it is what it is. And that's what our model is showing. So in terms of making conformity, as long as we're good in the near term, we're going to be fine. We don't have any issues. Even if we have to, you know, come up with a new budget, we have some room to revisit our budget and not have an issue, from my perspective. So that's it for conformity. This is just for information. This is kind of what we're showing for PM right now. Same kind of thing for PM, even for the NOx for PM, it's way down compared to what our historical budget is. I have no idea what our new budget will be, but this is for that time when we were unclassifiable and we had a budget. You know, I would imagine the budgets would be very different, but we do have some room based on previous budgets. And without any context, we also show CO2s because there are no CO2 standards. So I'm not sure that the numbers mean anything. In this case, it's more of a trend line. So you can see they're going down and then they start going back up again in 2050. What we really want to see and what everybody talks about is net zero by 2050. So the main takeaway from this is we're nowhere near net zero. Matter of fact, at the end of our last year of modeling, we actually see a slight uptick. So that is not the trajectory we want to. Even the decreases from 2025 to other years in terms of GHGs are not significant. So we have work to do on that front. And that's the kind of thing that you'll see CMAP doing more scenario testing and not necessarily with moves per se, but other modeling applications perhaps. This is just transportation. We have some other efforts going on that are looking at all sectors, and we'll see how we can marry the two at a future point. Are there any questions on conformity? Not seeing any. So what is next on the agenda? Since I've jumped around. So I'm gonna stop sharing, and we are going to a new tip platform. Is there something? I think Ben just so I'm going to share what our current tip looks like. One second, I'm still getting used to sharing things in. Now I think I'm getting the hang of this. All right, this is what that project that I talked about, the I-80 project, looks like in our tip. So let's see if I can zoom in a little bit. Nope, guess not. Army Control Plus does. Yeah. 200% it says. All right, this should help you see the screen a little bit better. So how we currently model stuff, it's really simple. It's not complicated. On a project like this, we would actually do a little bit of outside the tip in terms of adding some information in terms of hours of operation and truck restrictions, things of that nature. But in the tip, you know, it's 1.9 miles in our region. It has kind of 5 to 6 lanes depending on the within that segment. And it's going to go to 6 lanes the entire time. The current lanes are all 12 foot, but as I said, we're gonna have a 10-foot lane on the inside, then the next lane is gonna be 11 foot, and then the rest of them are gonna be 12 foot. And the speeds vary from 55 for trucks to 65 for cars. So that's how we capture this information now. I don't have a screenshot of what our tip will look like, but I can walk you through. One of the things that we're going to, what you should notice here is we have nothing that talks about direction. So in the new platform, we're going to actually have all this information, but by direction. So in this project, all the attributes for how it would look eastbound would be filled in. And then another box would pop up for all the attributes for how it would look westbound. And we have projects in which they don't have the same amount of lanes eastbound and westbound, or north and south, depending on what the project is. And have other variables that we can't capture real well the way our current platform is. In our new platform, we will be able to have information by direction. We're going to be able to add parking information, on-street parking, hours in which things are parking. You know, if you're allowed to park overnight versus just during the day, that kind of stuff. Parking, as Craig would say, it does impact our model. We'll be able to better have lane widths and things of that nature. So right now, as it says, you know, all the lanes are 12-foot wide. Go in the future, that 10-foot lane that's wide would be captured differently than it is now. And westbound, you would only have 12-foot lanes, but eastbound, you would have a 10-foot lane, 11-foot lane, the 12-foot lane in the tip. What we do is we pull the information from the tip. We have a process by which we can download it and import it into our travel demand model. On a project like this, we have to kind of do it manually because the tip isn't really structured to be seamless in terms of the input into our travel demand model. Most projects it is, but an occasion on a project like this, it doesn't work well. Hopefully in our new platform, we'll be able to capture that information better. We have a bunch of projects that are not exempt. Those are the ones that go through conformity. We also have what we call exempt tested. And those are projects that are not required to go through conformity, but that changes related to that project are things that we feel that we should capture in our model. When we go to the new platform, we will be updating every exempt tested and every non-exempt project so that we can then transition to having all that information populated into our travel demand model more seamlessly, more accurately, and hopefully it'll just make the modeling process better. That's the whole goal of what we're trying to do is improve our modeling process by having more accurate information. We're looking at other enhancements, such as perhaps having ADTs put in for projects so that we have a before and an after. And you know, that might actually be something that would be useful, as we know that the amount of travel, VMT, for instance, does affect emissions. So we're constantly striving to improve not just how we do our modeling, but how we input information into our model. And when we switch to our new tip platform, which should be, we're hoping January, it should be coming up. We'll then spend a bunch of time updating the projects in the tip, and then working on making sure that that seamlessly is inputted into our travel demand model. So that's something that, you know, the folks on this call should be aware of is coming. We are, again, it's another enhancement that we're working to do. Not related to this, so that's the tip, and that's the here and the now. We're also starting the process at CMAP of doing our next long-range plan. So it's still going to go only out to 2050. So we're not going to change our horizon year. That'll still be 2050. What we are going to be doing is, and I'm not sharing anything because nothing's been finalized yet, but the direction that it's heading is that regionally significant projects, that definition is really specific for projects that are related to conformity. Regionally, if you Google regionally significant projects, the only time you'll see it come up is actually in transportation conformity documents. So we will be changing, right now CMAP uses the term regionally significant for our major capital projects. We're actually going to change the name to regional capital projects. I think RCP is going to be the new acronym. So it won't be called regionally significant projects. We'll leave that for conformity. And our kind of major capital projects in the long range plan will be called regional capital projects. Now, what they have been considering doing and what the direction is that they're likely going in towards, and they're not final. I want to emphasize that nothing's final, but tying regional capital projects to projects that have an impact on the network. So what projects have impacts on our network? Those are all the projects that go through conformity. Those are our not exempt projects. I mean, one of the reasons they go through conformity is they change our network. Whether they're adding lanes, removing lanes, you know, new roads or extensions of roads, what have you. In the transportation conformity regulations, there's a whole list of projects that qualify for having to go through transportation conformity. It is likely that most, if not all, of those types of projects will also be considered regional capital projects. There might be some nuance there. They might have to be on the NHS system or something of that nature, but that's still to be determined. But it's likely that what goes through conformity will also be considered a regional capital project. That the two, if you did a Venn diagram, there would be a big chunk in the middle that would be both projects subject to conformity and regional capital projects. That's not that different than what we have now. It is a little bit different, but it's not super different. If you think about it, most of our big projects are also projects that are going through conformity. You know, I-80 that's being rebuilt, they're adding a lane in each direction from Ridge Road to US 30 out there in Will County and Joliet. That's a $1 billion project. It went through conformity, it's adding lanes. So it was a regionally significant project and it was going through conformity. Most projects that go through that are regionally significant go through conformity. Not all of them. There's a few that are just reconstructions that are just really expensive. You know, if you rebuild the interstate as it is and you don't change capacity, that does not go through conformity. But most stuff that is big project, big ticket items are changing how they impact travel and the network. And so those get conformed. So we will likely have at our next meeting, which will be to be determined, once this is kind of finalized, I'll have that group give us a presentation so folks can be comfortable with the direction that CMAP's going in and how it relates to conformity and how conformity and the long-range plan and the mix of projects are all kind of interwoven. But it's definitely the trend line is that projects that go through conformity, more of them will be considered regional capital projects than they are now. So I don't know if people have any questions about that. Okay, or about our tip, changes to our tip. Feel free to chime in. We're here to talk. All right, I will stop sharing on that. Hearing none, so that is item 3. The big thing is going to be item 4. I'm sorry, item 4. So CMAP made a bunch of changes to how we do our modeling. So I'm going to now share again. And I have an actual presentation this time. See if I'm getting better at sharing. I am. All right. Excellent. All right. So I'm going to go over what's changed for the current conformity. What does this mean? And what are some of our next steps? All right. We switched to Moves 4. That's a big change. We reconfigured and recalculated how vehicles are assigned to various vehicle classifications. So that's our move source type ID and our age distribution. Those we went over how we did our process on how to do that. And we changed our distributions on those kinds of things. And in Moves 4, we were able to account for electric vehicles and model the impact of that both in the near term and in the long term. So Moves 4 incorporates several important updates, including the most important of which are some new EPA rulemaking, specifically, and really the one at the top is the main one, the heavy duty low NOx rule for model years 2027 and later. When I show you the results, you will see the impact of that rule. It was significant. We also have the light duty greenhouse gas rules for model years. These aren't all the things. These are just kind of the major things. And then the ability to model heavy duty battery electric and fuel cell vehicles, basically EVs, as well as compressed natural gas for long haul combination trucks. Those are some of the major things that happen. Future year NOx and PM emissions are notably lower due to the heavy duty 2027 rule. Future year GHG emissions are also lower due to the light duty GHG 2023 rule. And then evaporative hydrocarbon emissions from refueling, they do increase in the near term due to some enhancements in how they calculate those and some new data. Heavy-duty gasoline vehicle refueling emissions decrease, however, in the later years because of, again, that heavy-duty NOx 2027 rule. I'm not going over these in any detail, but this gives you a sense of the scale of the changes that Moves 4 enacted. So there was a lot of changes. So going from Moves 3 to Moves 4, you can't just say this one thing changed and the results are reflective of that one thing. There was a whole bunch of things that they changed in Moves 4 from Moves 3. As I said, we didn't just switch models, however, we also went over our vehicle registration. So because we were switching to Moves 4 and we wanted to be able to model and account for electric vehicles, we had to look at our registrations and make sure that we could do that. So CMAP staff went over how we actually disperse and assign vehicles, so source type ID and our age distribution. And we revisited our methodology. And in order to account for electric vehicles, we had to develop and kind of tweak our current methodology. In doing so, we noticed that there was a number of changes that these tweaks caused. So as part of the process, we reviewed both our methodology and we determined that the current methodology we had wasn't going to be adequate for what we wanted to do. And in reviewing that, we not only wanted to account for EVs, but we're also constantly trying to improve our methodology. And that's what you'll see here. So the revised methodology resulted in a number of vehicles being reclassified amongst the Moves source type IDs. The main thing here is not that we reclassified and hundreds of thousands of cars became trucks and hundreds of thousands of trucks became cars and whatever. The net effect on all the different years that we modeled was that emissions never changed by more than 5%. So from my perspective, while we moved a ton of vehicles from one class to another and vice versa, and we did a whole bunch of stuff, and I'll show you on the next slide, even more stuff. The net change, things kind of offset one another. And so from my perspective, I was comfortable going forward with these changes in how we classify vehicles because the impact on emissions related to this was going to be minimal. If there was a big impact, we'd have to dig deeper and make sure that what we were doing, we were comfortable with. So before we used it, we did a bunch of testing, and the net result was we really didn't see huge spikes or huge decreases in emissions related to just this change. And again, we went and looked at every source type ID. So whether it was passenger car, so 21, all the way out to the long haul combination truck 62, all of that stuff, we looked at the changes. And you can see we mapped it out. So you can see this is how many were in one category and how many went to another category. So we really tried to be thorough in our analysis and understanding of how we're going to do this. Because at the end of the day, not only do we want to improve and get better, we want to be as accurate as we can. We also want to put ourselves in a position where we're doing this statewide, not just in Northeast Illinois, because IDOT and Illinois EPA are interested in CMAP getting statewide vehicle data and doing this and standardizing this so that everybody who's using the outputs are using it the same way. And so we ought to be sure in our methodology so that when we produce these sums by source type ID and age distribution, there's a lot of confidence in what we're producing. In addition to, so we changed the model. We changed how we distribute vehicle registrations within the Moose source types ID and age distribution. We also wanted to tackle and use the AVF tool, which has some new capabilities that Moves 3 didn't have, to model EVs and show the impacts of EVs. So there are 4 fuel files that go into Moves, one of which is the alternative vehicle fuel and technologies file. That one has vehicles by age. So it goes all the way back 30 years. And it basically has, for every source type ID, the percentage that use gasoline, that use diesel, that use, and you can see them, they're all kind of listed here. Let's see if I can. So gasoline, diesel, E85, CNG, battery electric, and fuel cells. So hybrids, the way EPA guidance is right now, are still considered gasoline vehicles. So those are not separated out. But these types of fuel, each move source type ID, so 21, which is cars, we assign percentages for every year, every model year, that are gasoline and so forth. What we didn't have the ability to do, and why we didn't model EVs, is we always knew how much, or we had a pretty good sense of what percentage or how much of the current composition of the vehicle fleet was EVs, but there was no way to project it forward. There's no way to say that in the future it'll be anything different than it is today. And so because we didn't really have a way to do that, a sound methodology, a defensible position, we didn't. The most defensible position was not to model that and show the maximum amount of emissions, because anything that added EVs or some of these alternative fuels would reduce emissions. So we had to have a way to justify that, and we didn't really have that. Moose 4, however, does have that. So it has the alternative vehicle fuel technology is an input file, but they also added a tool. And this tool allows us to project into the future the percentages that we've been talking about. So this is what that tool looks like. So to use the tool, we have to make some assumptions. And so we made our first assumption is, what's the last complete model year? Now, when we bought the 2022 vehicle data, we bought it in mid-November. From my perspective, that's not technically a complete year, but it's darn close. Technically you would have to be in December to have the entire model year. But then our previous data that we were using, I think, was 2018. And we didn't want to go back to 2018 and use that as a complete model year. That didn't seem, from trying to understand the changes in vehicle fleets and EVs, to be a good idea. So we have made the assumption that 2022 is a complete model year, knowing that it doesn't have December's data in it. But it's probably not the biggest sales time of the year for new cars. December typically isn't. So we felt comfortable doing that. If others think that we shouldn't do that, now's an opportunity to give input into that. We also there's a gap filling method. We use the default settings for that. So we don't always have information going back that's super accurate. You have to model the last 30 years. So if we get 2022 data, we have to go all the way back to 1992. How good is that data? Are there things that are incomplete in the registration file? Perhaps. To fill in any gaps, we use the default settings that the AVF tool has. And then you have to project forward. So you take the information you have, you make sure it's complete by filling in gaps, and then you use that as your base year, and you project it forward for future EV fleet distribution and alternative fuels. And we use the proportional method. This method projects the future fuel type distributions, and it's on the screen, but I'm going to read it because it's important, based on proportional differences between the local and national distributions in the last complete model year. This preserves the differences between local conditions and national average. We don't like using national defaults in CMAP. It has too much influence from California. It's not reflective of our on how the vehicle fleet turnover occurs locally and our age distributions and stuff like that. So when we don't want to use national defaults. There are times where it's appropriate, and you don't have good local information, but we really wanted to use the proportional method to preserve the difference between the local and national distributions. And you could see basically what you see on the right there is how the AVF tool looks and pretty much how CMAP used it. I think I can't remember if I changed it all to proportional, or if we use national averages for 2 of the truck inputs. Some of those trucks are long hauls, so national averages do make some sense for stuff that isn't just generated in our area. So I think I may have left those as national for those 2 and use proportional for everything, but I can't remember now off the top of my head. I know that me and you had discussions about what method to use, and proportionality is what we wanted to use. I just can't remember if I switched them all to proportional or not. So this is a point that people should weigh in on or confirm that you're okay with CMAP's approach, because this is going to be the way that we do our modeling going forward. And we would like, if others are doing a moves modeling, to use the same method. So Michael Leslie is giving us a thumbs up. So, you know, that's good. I don't know if anybody else here wants to chime in, but we feel pretty okay with this method. Not seeing anybody else chiming in. Okay.
Ledco agrees with that.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Mark. Here are the results. So this incorporates, I'm going to show you the results for every year that we model. So this shows, maybe I'll zoom in a little bit more. What you want to look at here, what I want to emphasize is not the numbers, but the trend line. So what we did is we looked at previous conformities and we compared how things changed. So this last data point will have reflection of both modeling EVs, redistribution of the vehicle registration file for source type, ID, and age distribution, and switching to a new moves model. As you can see in 2025, now I think the results we're only showing is for IM, just the inspection maintenance area. Could be wrong. Is that correct, you? I think these were just for IM. Or are these total?
The green, blue line for the total, and green, orange for the IM, and gray for the non.
Oh yeah, I can. If I looked at my own slides, you would see that. But if you look at the trend lines, they're similar for 2025. It wasn't a big change. A little bit on the VOC, we expected that. The Moves 4 calculates VOC a little higher than Moves 3 did. So that's good. So nothing stood out there that was out of the ordinary. 2030, the 2027 rule for NOx starts to kick in, but not fully. But you can really see the drop off in NOx. So that's really attributed mainly to the model. And we have on the far right and the lower right, that's kind of our control total. It's our VMT. So you'll see VMT isn't really changing much from one conformity to another, but the results of our of NOx really went down. And VOC, again, 2030 is still a bit near termish, so I'm not surprised that that went up. 2035, look at NOx just falling off the board. So really the impacts of that rule are really starting to be felt. PM is going down also a little bit. Everything else is staying kind of within a small range. 2040, again, same trend lines, NOx going way down, everything else kind of staying consistent. And 2050, you know, NOx is really falling off the cliff. So when we talk about the impacts of regulatory changes, there is nothing more dramatic than what we're seeing with NOx and Moves 4 capturing that rule. The change between Moves 3 and Moves 4 for NOx is really that HD, that heavy duty truck rule. If that were to be rescinded or go away at some point, I think we would see a return to what we saw previous conformities for NOx. So right now, just switching to the moves, which is incorporating a new rule, we are seeing a big reduction in on-road mobile source NOx. So that's something that everybody should be aware of. It has nothing to do with the projects in the tip. It doesn't really have anything to do with the way that we assign vehicles. It has really to do with using a new moves and the rules that new moves model incorporates. This is just another way to show it. What this slide shows is really, it's just showing each of the pollutants by scenario year. And you can really see in the middle, NOx just drops off the cliff. And that's our July weekday, which is what we actually show in our conformity memo. So a little bit of uptick in VOCs in the beginning, which is if you look at the moves, the stuff that EPA has put out there, and many of us are on the MJO moves monthly calls. This is expected. This is not something that I see as out of the ordinary, both in terms of the reductions of NOx and the increase in VOC. So that's not a surprise to me. What we don't really see much of, much change from the moves model, really, to be honest. I don't see a lot of change in CO2. So the effects of that 2023 rule, we're not really seeing a big change in GHGs. So that did not have the impact that the heavy duty NOx rule did. In previous discussions, we've actually showed maybe a year or two ago the outsized influence that trucks have on NOx. And since this was a rule that targeted trucks, that's not a surprise. The GHG rules really target cars, but cars have so much VMT that unless the fleet is totally EV, you're just not going to see it. Cars are lasting so much longer too. So we're having older cars in the vehicle fleet and all that kind of stuff. So that's also not a surprise. It's disappointing that doesn't have as much of an impact as the NOx rule does, but it's also not a surprise. Where do we go from here? We're going to continue to do this, review our methodologies, update our data inputs, you know, continue to review our process. It's a modeling exercise, and we're always striving to do that as well as we can and look for enhancements and improvements. We have more people at CMAP that do moves modeling now. We have more people who understand the model, and we have more opportunities to enhance how we do our modeling and incorporate that into different things that we do so that we can stand behind our numbers in the way that we've always have. But we can do that with confidence, knowing that we're always trying to improve and use the latest and greatest assumptions, both in terms of data and process. Moose 5 was released. Now, when I wrote these slides, it was last week because I was off most of last week. So it was released actually 2 weeks ago now, not last week. But our clock to switch to Moose 5 hasn't started because it hasn't been published in the Federal Register yet. That's coming soon. Michael, you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, whenever it comes out in the Federal Register. So
yeah, so maybe in a week or two, I would expect that to be very soon. That'll probably start. I think what I heard from Megan Beardsley is that it'll be the same as what it's been before. So it'll be a 2-year clock.
correct.
So there's same as when they do Moose 4, Moose 3. Don't anticipate any changes in terms of the rollout for time frames. For SIPs, I think you have to switch right away. But for transportation conformity, we'll have 2 years. So we will likely. There is some concern at CMAP about whether or not things will be rolled back or rescinded in terms of rules that are baked into some of these models. We don't know. So we might take a little slow approach to adopting Moose 5 and just see how things play out. We'll do what we did last time for Moose 4 is we did testing over a summer, and then we finally used it for conformity. I want to say we had 24 months. I think by somewhere between 12 and 18 months, we had switched. We'll look at a similar time frame. So we'll take our time. We'll understand the impacts that the model has. We kind of take a step-by-step approach. So we want to see just keeping all the data the same, but switching models, what's the impact? What does that change in emissions? And then are there new requirements as there was for Moose 4 in terms of data? I don't think Moose 5 has any new requirements for data. It doesn't have the AVF tool kind of new feature that's already in there. There's not another new feature that I'm aware of in Moose 5, but I haven't installed it and played with it yet. So if there's updates to our data that we need to do to make sure that we get the full capabilities of Moose 5, we'll do that too. And that'll be kind of the next thing. So we test the model, make sure we can install it on our IT, which is always a challenge. It's more of a challenge than you would think for those who don't use Moose. Getting Moose installed on the IT side is not it's not as simple as just kind of downloading the latest version. There's more to it than that. We also have to make some decisions as to when we switch related to other planning activities. As I mentioned, we're going to a new long-range plan. What model do we use to model that long-range plan? We have to think carefully of. Right now, it would be Moose 4, but we'll be doing all the modeling for that next plan around March of 2026. So do we fully switch to Moose 5? And by then, we should be able to. And we want to, in a typical way of looking at this, we would want to model our new long-range plan with the most current model and capture all that has to offer. However, if there are concerns about any kind of rollbacks, we don't want to overestimate emission reductions. And so we need to kind of see how things are going to play out with the new administration. We just have to be careful about not being overly aggressive, but also not being stuck in not going forward either. So Moves 5, we won't be required to switch to Moves 5 when we're modeling for the new plan. But that is our desired goal, is to switch and use Moves 5 for our next long range plan, unless something changes in the regulatory framework. So that is our plan. Testing over the summer. We will use Moose 4 for our next conformity, which is in this coming spring, because we won't be doing the Moose 5 testing until after that conformity. And then we will make a decision whether or not to switch to Moose 5 for this time next year. If we do, then we'll be using it for the new plan. If we don't, we'll have to have further discussions on whether or not to use it for the next plan. It's not required that we use it because we'll still be within that 2-year window. But it would be a little awkward if we switched to Moose 5 after the new plan. That wouldn't make any sense to me. So these are internal discussions that we'll have at CMAP, but also with you guys on a future call as we get more information about just what does the future look like. And at some point we have to make a decision. Likely that decision point is around this time next year. So it's not as far away as we might think. And then we'll go from there. Our biggest impediment, however, though, is data. We need new vehicle data. We are stuck in this legal quandary of having an agreement with the Illinois Secretary of State to get new data and process that for the entire state. We have submitted our request and signed, sealed, and delivered all the things that they asked for from us. But they have insisted that Illinois EPA also join the agreement. That's caused a bit of a conundrum. So CMAP's going to get the raw data. CMAP's going to store it, process it, secure it, all of that kind of stuff. And so it makes a lot of sense for CMAP to sign that agreement that spells out how the data is to be used, stored, who has access to it, all that stuff. For whatever reason, they have also insisted that Illinois EPA signs that agreement. Illinois EPA is not getting the raw data. They are not storing it, and they have no responsibility on who gets access to it or how to secure it. So I understand their reluctance to sign an agreement that says this is how the data will be stored when they have no control over the data whatsoever. But this is where we're at. Illinois EPA is not comfortable signing an agreement about data usage for which they have no control over. And Illinois Secretary of State is saying that they must sign it for CMAP to get the data. And so we're trying to work through, have more conversations with the Illinois Secretary of State's office to see how do we get past this impasse. It's been going on for probably 6 months. So it's not been a short period of time, and we're not really moving the request further along. So we may have to start again. We may have to start with a new request. We may have to backtrack and go back to Northeast Illinois and just have the CMAP only. We don't know yet how that's going to play out. It is our desire to have one request in which we can do all of the vehicle assignments, vehicle registration assignments for Moose source type ID, age distribution, the AVF2 fleet. We also do it for that now, and distribute that to IDOT, to Illinois EPA, and to potentially other MPOs, so that we're all operating from the same template. It makes no sense to have everybody try to reinvent the wheel. We have the technical capabilities. We have the software and the modeling servers. I mean, it takes 3 days using our fancy modeling servers just to process the data. Not everybody has that capability. We do, and we're offering it as a free service to the rest of the state. We just need the data. So just so people are on this call understand where we're at, we're kind of stuck right now. We may have to re-examine what we're asking for. We're hoping that we can still go through this and do this with the state. The state has its own request, the state being IDOT. It's a little different than what CMAP's request would be. CMAP's is an annual. We want to buy this data annually and process it annually because we know that the composition of the fleet, especially for EVs, is changing rapidly, and we want to capture that. And if we have a standardized methodology, standardized way to get the data, we can do this annually and release it to everybody who needs to get this kind of information. The state of Illinois is more of a one-time thing, and they're also looking at some historic trends that we're not asking for. So that's kind of where that's at. So they might be doing something similar, and they might be further along than we are in our current request. But we're not going to be able to access their data because they can't share the raw data, just like we can't share the raw data. So we're working with them to help them use the same methodology we use for making those assignments to the source type ID, the H distribution, and the AVFT. So we're giving them technical assistance where we can, and trying to be a good partner in that regard. So with that, are there any questions related to any of this updates that we've done for vehicles, EV modeling, or switching to new moves and future switch to moves 5? Now is a good time to ask those questions if you have them. Otherwise, I could call on people. And I'll stop sharing. Okay. So does nobody wants to chime in here? How about our federal partners? Is this an approach that you guys are comfortable with? FHWA and I think it's FTA. I don't see
EPA is
Montana.
okay with it.
FHWA is okay. I know Betsy, are you still on? Betsy was on. Betsy, do you have anything you want to chime in on? I don't see Taylor on.
No, I think that sounds fine. Maybe offline. I jumped in a little bit late and I had a question about the conformity, just making sure, everything that's not exempt gets put in that conformity, run. I wasn't clear about the changes that you were talking about, but we don't need to belabor it here.
Yeah.
But the rest of it sounds fine. And if you need any help with the Secretary of State, I don't know if there's anything, any assistance we can provide, or through the DOT, you might need to accelerate it. Sometimes it's difficult to get things out of them. So thanks.
Okay, that's good to know. In terms of conformity, I can answer that real quick. We model all the projects. They're all in our network. What the conformity amendment shows is just new projects or projects that had changes. So
Okay.
everything is, so we do the thing at the whole regional level. All not exempt projects are in it every time. The memo just is the ones that have changed or been added.
Yeah, and the example that you used for the Flex Road, that was a good one. I was a little, I'm not sure how your tip operates exactly, but I didn't see a breakdown federal and state or federal local. Is that typical?
They're not using in Illinois. They're only using Illinois funds. They're not using.
Just state only?
Yeah,
Okay.
all the federal funds went to Indiana.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that clarification.
Sure, no problem. It's good to have questions. We don't get a lot. We got a lot of people on the meeting, but not a lot of questions. Okay. Any other questions on that? Sophie, do you guys want to talk about your request at all? I know I kind of mentioned it a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, I can just add, first of all, thanks to Russell and you in particular for being so helpful and making sure that this is our first time doing this, and it's actually an extremely complicated process for those who don't know, to map what the Secretary of State gives onto the move source types. And so CMAP is being very generous with technical assistance, and that's very appreciated. But yeah, we're almost I don't want to say almost there with our data request, because you never know until you have it. But our legal agreement is fully executed, and they are now processing the data. So we're working with IT to get the infrastructure in place to process that once we do have access. And yeah, since this is our first time doing it, we requested historic data as well, which, as compared to CMAP, already has a lot of that historic data on file, and certainly will be more than happy to share process data with CMAP and with IEPA to whatever extent is helpful, given that it has to be the process data.
Yeah, and one of the challenges is that the Illinois Secretary of State's office is not a state agency in the same way that IDOT and Illinois EPA is. It's its own independent agency. You know, the head of the Illinois Secretary of State is a elected position. So it's not like we can just have the governor kind of referee between the state agencies. That's a bit of an independent state agency. So that's a little nuance there that unfortunately is not helpful. It's not value added. Um, and Sophie, I think, has learned what some of us who have gotten this data before. It is exceedingly frustrating how long it takes to make this request and then get the data. It just takes a super long time, like longer than you would ever imagine.
Yeah,
think
I
we
would
actually
never
tried to
have
partner- yeah, go ahead.
expected when we initially submitted this last January that we would still be here. So
Yeah, and CMAP started its request. I think we started with Illinois EPA not this August, but the August before. So we're into the 15-month window now. So I've already missed one budget year. So that's not helpful either when you don't actually use your budget to buy these things. It's harder to maintain it in the next budget. So with that, I don't know, let's see, is anybody from Illinois EPA? Matt, you're still on. I don't know, we're gonna go to the next item, which is the transportation conformity SIP. That's more of a Rory thing probably, but I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add. I know Illinois EPA was working on a transportation conformity SIP. I've not heard anything about it in months, so I don't know if there's any changes. But Matt, if you have anything, or Michael, if they shared anything with you.
I haven't worked on that at all.
Okay.
Yeah, I know they're kind of working on it, but they have other sort of bigger picture things that have taken priority.
So that is so often the case when it comes to the Illinois Transportation Conformity SIP is that it's been in a state of development for about 20-25 years, something of that nature. So other priorities always do seem to arise. So I'm not anticipating any movement on this anytime soon. But if there is, we'll discuss it at the next meeting. Agency updates. I do want to give one update. Many of you on this call already know this. So in July, I think it was July, I started kind of an informal modeling group. So we meet roughly once a month, depending on schedules. And it's LADCO, it's Illinois EPA, not necessarily the folks on this call, other than Rory, CMAP, some IDOT folks, Sophie and Chen is on here. I think he's still on vacation. And we meet and we just discuss and it's a peer exchange. It's informal. We don't take meeting notes or record it. And it's a way for people who do moves modeling and or emissions modeling to just talk and support one another. Ask when there's questions or how do you do this, or present ideas and get feedback. So it's based off of what we used to have in place, which was called CatMug. We used to have this thing where it was a modeling group that met roughly monthly. It focused more on the travel demand side. We have not really ventured into the travel demand side of the modeling discussion yet. We've stuck to emissions modeling. But I think it's been Illinois EPA, I think, has found it very helpful. I know that Mark, I think you're still on here somewhere. If Mark from LAG, yeah, Mark, you're on the call.
Yeah.
So I think it's been a good way to try to bring in folks within the government agencies that are doing this and make it, for lack of a better word, I hate using this, but make it a safe space for people to be able to talk to one another and not worry about, if you're doing something wrong, or if you didn't get the right result, or if you can't get something to work. It's a way to just talk to one another. So far, it's been mainly CMAP doing the talking. A little bit of LADCO, but we're trying to get the other agencies to kind of, contribute a little bit more and have a more free-flowing discussion. It's a work in progress. But like I said, we do meet once a month roughly. It is informal. And I think it's still been very useful for everybody to just meet and greet, if nothing else. You know, put names to faces, to, you know who you're talking to at other agencies is a good thing. So that's what we'll do. We'll keep it going. Like I said, it's informal. I have the support of the executive staff at CMAP to keep this going, and we'll see where it leads. So I just want to throw that out there. I don't know if other agencies would like to provide updates. Michael, you guys have anything at EPA for the group?
No, no, I think we've hit all the big things, and we'll just, stay tuned for the transition. So.
Okay. Let's see, I'll go around. I'll ask the different members. Mark, anything from the transit side that, from RTA's perspective that we should know about? I know you guys got fiscal cliff.
Yeah, nothing new right now.
I know that we did give a lot of money to CTA and even the PACE to do electric buses. And we will be working with those agencies. We mentioned this once before, but I think we're gonna double our efforts to work with those agencies to have a better idea of when those buses will be coming online and try to associate some BMT with them and also understand the service areas so that we can incorporate those into our MOVES modeling in the future. Let's see who else we got. Ida, Chris, you want to give us anything?
No, I don't think so.
That sounded less than reassuring. Come on, spit it out, Chris. Come on.
Yeah, no, nothing too crazy. Glad to have Jason be able to attend these meetings and Sophie in our modeling group. So a little bit stronger presence from my dad. So.
All right. And if you maybe noticed over the last couple of meetings, we've become a little more informal. We don't want to be subject to the Open Meetings Act requirements, so that's why we don't meet in person. And because we don't meet in person, we have to be a little bit more informal, which is, I think that this format works still well for everybody being able to contribute and help our modeling process go forward in a way that everybody understands. If there is a need to be more formal and to do stuff differently, we can revisit that. But for right now, this is the process that we intend to go forward with. I think that Michael, you would know this. This is similar to how it is elsewhere.
Yeah, typically. Yep.
So we were probably a little more formal than other places, but that worked
For
for us.
sure.
So, the other thing that we'll be doing at CMAP is we're going to be in the process of developing emission rates. We're going to be starting that work soon. We'll be using MOVES 4 to do that. Emission rate work will be used to support first the CMAC call for projects, which is out there right now. It ends in December. And so we'll be using the new emission rates. Right now we have emission rates from MOVES 3, but we'll be using the MOVES 4 emission rates to evaluate projects that have been submitted under this call for CMAC. We will likely also be using these emission rates, and that's why it gets a little tricky, to evaluate the regional capital projects. That's why determining which model to use is actually going to have to happen a little quicker than we might realize. We're not at the process of having a call, so to speak, for regional capital projects yet, so we don't have a time frame by which those need to be evaluated, but it's possible that it might be over the summer. In which case we would have to expedite whether or not we use MOVES 5 or MOVES 4. And we might have to have another call about just with you guys what the preferred approach would be so that we have some buy-in, and it's not just CMAP making the decision, but it's an informed decision that CMAP is making in consultation with its partners. So that's the next thing on the CMAP horizon. Have I left anything out? I don't think so. I think we've covered everything, and I think we're at time. So does anybody have anything they'd like to add? No hands are being raised, no nothing. Grace, anything you want to add? This is your first interagency consultation meeting. So I think that you have a different counterpart with EPA at NERC.
Yeah, we have a different group of people that I think work with. But yeah, it was great to be able to sit in on this and kind of learn more about what CMAP is doing. So thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Okay. With that, we'll end the meeting. I hope everybody enjoys the holidays that are coming up. The next meeting will be on call. It's possible that due to our plan update, we may have to meet sometime in February or March. But if not, the next meeting will be in the spring when we do our next conformity, which will be end April, early May, sometime in that time frame. If something were to change though, like I said, we are always on call and ready to go at a moment's notice. So
Thanks,
thank you
Russell.
everybody for
Peace.
coming.